Hey, good morning, good afternoon, guys. We're going to talk about federalism in America today. So, have your Google Docs note sheet on L2, Federalism in America, ready so you guys can fill in and knock out your answers. So, let's talk about federalism. We've been talking about it the last day or so. I gave you some examples, all right? And we're going to keep building on that. So, first of all, the learning objectives today, we want to explain how federalism impacts the relationship between the national government and the states. I know you've addressed how there's three different layers of that federalism cake: local, state, and federal. But today we want to really focus on some of the vocab, and we really want to go over some of the nitty gritty on what those terms actually mean. The three terms are expressed, reserved, and concurrent powers. Okay? Some people call them delineated too. You've heard that term as well. And shared powers might be another term you hear. But these are the terms you're actually going to see on the test. So we need to know the precise vocabulary. So, what is federalism? Federalism, aka, means also known as levels of government, power and responsibilities that are shared between local, state, and federal governments. So these are laws and policies that are made at all levels of government, and citizens have the opportunity to get involved at all levels of those governments too. For example, I have a state driver's license. I vote in a local election for school board levies, and I vote for a federal election for the president. So I've been involved at all three levels. Another example would be in education. There's Oak Hills Local Schools. We have an Ohio Department of Education. And there's also national standards that have been produced for math and English. And like I just said, you can vote for local, state, and federal officials. So this is what we kind of looked at yesterday as an example. There's different types of systems. There's a unitary system and there is a confederation. A unitary system is where all power is held by a single entity. So that's where there's a national government, like a king. So all the power is held within the hands of the few or the one. Okay? That's where we see King George down there singing in the Hamilton play. In a confederation, that's where you have state governments hold the majority of power. So yesterday, when you guys did your assignment, in our first form of government, the Articles of Confederation, our state governments actually held the power. That's where the government's power came from. So how do we divide and share that power? So in our national government, we have what we call enumerated or express powers. And there's also something called implied powers. Now that can be a little confusing. Powers that are given to the national government because they are either stated in the Constitution. If they're stated, they are expressed. They are written down. I'm sure you guys have seen commercials or heard commercials. They say express written blank, blank, blank. And they mention how in fine print certain things are written down explaining how this is the rule, this is the condition you must meet, these are the things that happen, blah, blah, blah. If you put your money in the bank, it says FDIC, your money's insured. It's express written. Or this cannot be reproduced without express written consent of the National Football League. So, in implied powers, things are assumed to exist. Okay? And they are necessary for the government to fulfill its responsibilities. So, for example, the federal government today has the power to declare war, conduct foreign affairs, and to coin money. Those are expressly written in our Constitution. However, if we're going to declare war or coin money, where are we going to put that money? Now, there's nothing in the Constitution about a national bank. However, Congress had created a national bank, the original Bank of the United States. That was one of Alexander Hamilton's great creations. And that was considered to be an implied power. If we declare war, well, how are we going to raise an army? Well, we've had a draft. We had a draft during the Civil War. We had a draft during World War One, a draft during World War Two, a draft during the Vietnam War. A draft is an implied power. We can have a war that's declared by the Congress, but how would we raise that military? You raise it via a draft. That would be an implied power. So, implied power is something that's necessary and proper to carry out our duties. So, state governments have special powers that are reserved to them. When you think of things that are reserved for somebody, they're like set aside. Think about reserved seats or a reserved parking space. Those things are set aside for somebody. So the state government has certain powers that are set aside for them. They are things that aren't in the Constitution. When we talk about the Bill of Rights, Article number 10 in the Bill of Rights basically says things that aren't listed in the Constitution will be set aside for the states. Okay? That's why there's no laws in the Constitution about speeding or marriage license, okay, or school districts. Those are reserved for the states. Now, if they share powers, which some levels of government do, those are called concurrent. Now, me being a former Spanish student, I always remember con means with. I think that does. So con means with. So national with state. That's how I always remembered it. Concurrent with each other. They're both together. So, like for example, one of the best things there are powers that both the state and national government share. I always like to think of taxes as the best one. Okay, both national and state can tax. Those are two powers that the both state and the federal government share. Those are concurrent powers. So when you guys get that paycheck, we're always getting you on that one. And those are the examples we've gone over a number of times. National shared state powers. And if you label them, you have your enumerated or express powers, concurrent powers, reserve powers. I would make sure you know the different ways these are phrased. Okay? Now, if there is a conflict in law, so if, for example, a law is passed in a state, or if a state passes a law, or there's something that pops up that might be in conflict with a federal law, or a local law is in conflict with a state law, um, the supremacy clause, which is in the Constitution, basically says that the federal laws have the power over state and local governments. Okay, they are subordinate. So it's like when you're playing, if you guys ever play euchre, or you play hearts, or you play any card game where one card is more powerful, like you have the trump card in euchre, okay? Um, you throw down that powerful card, and we'll throw down that ace or that jack, okay? Um, the federal government always has that powerful last card to throw down, all right, to say, we have you, okay? So the supremacy clause basically means the federal government is on top of that. So when you think of that federalist, that federalism cake, that's why the three layers are so important. federal government's federal law is always on top. Nothing can ever overtake that. All right. Are there any questions? If so, please feel free to let me know. Feel free to rewind and go back as much as you want. Okay. There's also a quiz at the end. Make sure you guys knock that out at the end of the presentation. Click on the link on your Google Classroom and have a great weekend. Thanks.